So some people have been asking me on my Instagram how I edit my photos, so I thought I'd just do a quick run through of how I go ahead and edit my photos. If you are interested, my Instagram link is down below in the description. Okay, so this photo is taken in RAW, so the first thing I'm going to do is adjust the temperature because I don't really want too much of the orange, although the white balance I think is kind of alright at the moment. Okay, so this is the photo at the moment. I've just increased the temperature a tiny bit and also decreased the tint ever so slightly. Now I am going to mess around with the exposure, probably bring it up a tiny bit, but I'm going to mainly do that with the shadows and highlights. I'm going to put a bit of contrast in there too, so the highlights, probably bring those down a bit, and also bring up the shadows a fair amount, because you can see it's actually quite a dark image. So before we've got that, and then that's it afterwards. We're going to adjust the colours a bit later. Now for whites, if you bring them up a bit, it makes the image a bit more vibrant, and again with blacks we bring them down. But that's kind of just a matter of opinion whether you want to do that or not. Now clarity, I usually just pull down a tiny bit, just because if it's too much clarity it looks a bit too contrasty and I don't like what it does to the skin either. So we'll bring that down to about -13. Okay, so I'm going to bring the vibrance up and the saturation down. So that's our basic panel done. So you can see that's it before and that's it after. All we've really done is brightened up the image slightly. So this is the tone curve. I usually come into RGB and I put a bit of a faded look on. So I'll pull that up there, bring that down. If you want to know how to get rid of one of these spots, just click it and drag it off the screen and it will disappear. Okay, so I'm going to leave it at that for the time being. You may find you want to come back and do that in a bit. Now I want to make the highlights have a little bit more, make the image have a bit more blue in it. So I'm just going to bring the blue up in the shadows a tiny bit. Also in the mid-tone slightly, because we've got quite an orange looking face at the moment. Play around with this. I mean, you can spend ages on the tone curves if you want, but I'm just doing this quite quickly. So if I turn it off, you can see the difference the tone curve has made to the image, and then this is the difference to the image in total. Hue, saturation and luminance, this is where you can really kind of do a lot with the colours. So if you want it more purple, obviously you can slide these to make it more purple. So I'm going to bring down the reds a bit. The oranges, I don't want it to be too green, so we'll just bring those down a tiny bit. I think I'm trying to go for a pink and blue look, so if I bring the yellows down a bit, the greens shouldn't really do anything, no. As for the blues, I quite like it with a sort of tealy green blue, so I'm going to bring those right down to the bottom. Before that, if we turn that off, that's what it looked like, and then afterwards, so it's just kind of adjusted the colours a bit there. Now, if we come down to saturation, you can obviously adjust how much saturation you want of different colours. I'm probably going to leave it mostly like it is at the moment. I may bring the blues up a bit and purples. I want it to be quite a vibrant saturated image, so I'm going to just play about with those. Now the orange on the front, I think I prefer it with a bit more saturation. Obviously this is all like personal preference and what you guys want to do. Luminance, if you're wondering, is brightness, so obviously I'm making the orange really bright at the moment, but I'm going to leave it at that for the time being, and obviously you can always come back to it and adjust it. Now split toning, this basically puts in a colour for your highlights and also your shadows. So I'm going to go for a sort of bluey look in my highlights and also in my shadows, but you can do what you want. So one way to see what colours you're actually selecting, because if you've got the saturation on 0, you can just press Alt and slide it as well, and you can get an idea for what colour you're putting in your image. So I'm kind of going for a bluey pink look, so I'm either going to go for a pink on my highlights and a sort of tealy blue on my shadows. So I'm going to leave it at that for the time being, so obviously that's before and that's after I've done the split toning, so you can see it adds a bit more interest in the colour. Now obviously this was the first image and this is the final image that we've got at the moment. So the next thing we want to do is detail. To be honest, this image isn't too bad. If you zoom in, we've got some noise here, but the camera isn't too bad in low light conditions, and this is only going on Instagram, so it's not really so much of a big deal. However, I am going to put the noise reduction probably around 17, maybe even 14. Leave the sharpening on where it is, and maybe put a bit more back in the colour of the noise reduction. It doesn't really make an awful lot of difference, but it sometimes helps with the blacks. So we'll close that. Camera calibration, this is another thing where you can adjust the colours. Now I usually like to bring the blue primary down and the red primary up, and that gives us our orange and teal look that you kind of see quite often. And then that's kind of a bit too OTT, so I'll bring the saturation down on possibly both of them, and then you can adjust the green primary to increase or decrease the sort of greenness of the blue. So I'm going to bring down the saturation a bit on the red primary. So that is before and that's afterwards. In fact, I'm just going to turn it off completely because I do kind of like how light the face is. Now if we come, that's basically the first round of editing done. Now what I am going to do is I'm going to come onto the brush tool. I'm going to try and make these blues here a bit more teal, so I'm just going to decrease the tint to green, and I'm just going to paint with the brush over those so I can see what I'm doing. You can see obviously I can increase the brightness and paint over there as well. So if I turn that off, turn it back on, you can see how much it's increased. Okay, so I'm going to try and brighten up the blue on the side here and maybe wash this out a bit because it brings out the bokeh we've got there as well, but also it's a light, that's the light that's shining on his face. So if I brighten that up, it kind of gives a better idea of where the light's coming from. So if I turn that off and that's on, it kind of gives a better reflection. It shows the light is shining on his face more. One thing I would suggest if you are going to be putting this on Instagram, to look at the top image here. This is roughly what it's going to look like when it's on Instagram. Decrease the brightness just a bit. That's kind of the image we're going to be looking at up there, and obviously this will be it when it's in full size. Now I will have to put this in Photoshop and make it wider because this is not the right size for Instagram, but that's roughly what we're looking at the moment. Now as for that, that's basically all I usually do. I might sort of make his face a bit brighter here so we can see the sunglasses. Just lighten that up a tiny bit, just a tiny bit of purple to counteract the green on his face. Now the last thing I usually do with these images is I will put some highlights in the hair. Now at the moment his hair is looking pretty frizzy, so there's probably not a lot I can do with that, but all I do is I go into the brush tool and I'll just bring up the exposure a tiny amount, decrease the brush size, and just paint over some certain strands of hair. What you want to do when you're doing this is you want to see where the natural highlights are from the actual light shining and reflecting through his hair on the image, and just sort of emphasize those highlights. One thing I will say, when you are zoomed in, you can end up overdoing this, but we can always adjust that later and get rid of some of the highlights. I might also adjust the colour, because if you look here, he's kind of got quite green. So if we bring up the purples a bit, changes that. Now sometimes what can look quite nice is if you change the colours. If you change the colours on the hair, it kind of gives a nice reflection from the light in front. So obviously I'm not going to go too crazy. And if we want to delete what we've done, we can just press the Alt button and then the brush tool and just brush over the top of that. So if I turn off the brush tool, that's what it looked like before the brush, that's what it looks like after the brush. And that's basically all I usually do in Lightroom. That's a before picture and that's the after. Then I'll go into Photoshop and I'll do some more adjustments with that. But that's it. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you guys want to follow my Instagram, it is linked down below in the description. But that is how I edit my photos using Adobe Lightroom. That's just a quick run through and tutorial.